Hey everyone, Tankenstein here. In this video, I'll be reviewing the KV-122. This is a currently tier 4 battle rating 5.3 heavy tank that exists as a premium vehicle for the Russian Ground Forces tech tree and costs 4,880 Golden Eagles. And also, of course, comes with 15 backups. Now with that being said, in this review, I'll be going over everything that you need to know about this tank, including its stats, how it plays, I'll give its strengths and weaknesses, I'll give some scores in several key areas, and then I'll give my final recommendation and if I feel if this vehicle is worth purchasing or not. As always, please consider subscribing if you'd like more content like this, as that would make you cooler than the Russians that thought that this tank would be a good idea. But without further ado, let's get into the video. To start, I'll place its stat card here on the side of the screen. Important things to note are its armor pen, its reload speed, and its power to weight ratio. Now for how it plays. Basically, this is an IS-2 with worse armor, mobility, and a lower BR. As such, the KV-122 has a cannon that is essentially a one-shot kill, though can overpen in rare instances. Because of this, it is tremendously powerful as a sniper or as a support tank if you can utilize cover properly. The KV-122, however, isn't as great in terms of armor at this BR, as cannons are typically more powerful here than when the KV-1 initially starts seeing battle around 4.0 BR, especially when the 122 is in an up tier. Due to this, as stated before, the KV-122 is best used from behind cover, and due to the tremendous power and long reload of this cannon, is ideal as a sniper. This is doubly so because though the hull armor flounders a bit at this BR, the turret armor is that of an IS-1, which is 100mm thick all around. This good turret armor will allow you to peek over cover rather than around it, and will remain relatively safe while sniping or supporting, at least if you don't have to go up on a hill, because this has a terrible cannon depression of just -3 degrees, meaning that you will not be able to hold down pretty much at all with this vehicle. Otherwise, if there is a good enough amount of cover, the KV-122 can occasionally frontline, as I've actually had some good success in that role. It largely depends, however, on having a well-trained crew to lower the reload time substantially, only having 1 or 2 enemies nearby, and of course a good amount of cover. Thus, you pretty much need to be a little bit lucky in order to frontline, though again, it can be effective. If you can manage those things, you can slip out of the sniping role and have a good time near the front. Regardless, due to the fact that this has a weaker engine than all KV tanks and is also heavier than most other KV tanks, the 122 will likely be forced into backline, support, and sniping roles. This again isn't necessarily a bad thing, as it plays to the strengths of the KV-122. However, it can force some of the more aggressive players to play less aggressively. But to put it succinctly, the KV-122 is a heavy tank whose armor is past its prime at this BR, though is still somewhat decent, and has a beast of a cannon and a reload time that will make it extremely powerful from a distance, but easily killed up close if you are not careful. Now with that said, let's get into its strengths and weaknesses, and first for its strengths. It has an incredibly powerful 122mm cannon that can easily one-shot all enemies that it will face, and from essentially any angle. Second, this features fairly good turret armor of 100mm surrounding the entirety of the turret. Third, this vehicle features decent-ish hull armor, but is really nothing spectacular at this BR, and is again a bit past its prime. Fourth, aside from its AP-HEBC shell, which you'll probably be using most of the time, this also features an extremely powerful HE shell. For its fifth strength, it has a surprisingly decent reverse speed of around 13.2 km per hour. And finally, the KV-122 features premium RP and SL bonuses. But with that said, let's get into its weaknesses. First, this features an absolutely terrible gun depression of just -3 degrees. Second, it features an awful reload rate of between 20.8 and 27.04 seconds per shot, depending on crew skill. Third, this features poor mobility. As I said before, it features the weakest of all engines in a KV tank. For its fourth weakness, this has a very large cannon that is easy to hit, damage, and destroy. Fifth, it lacks a top-mounted MG, which means that lightly armored vehicles and planes can easily counter this beast. For its sixth weakness, it has a huge commander's cupola that will act as a weak spot relative to the rest of the turret, and will stick out from behind cover. For its seventh weakness, this vehicle features very large fuel tanks and ammo racks all around the center of the vehicle that makes it a death trap if penned. And finally, the KV-122 only has 4 crew members, which is is especially low for a heavy tank. Worse yet is that they're all cramped in a relatively small interior. Now with all that out of the way, let's get into how I score this vehicle. And first for armament. You might call this sacrilegious, but I will give it a 6.5 out of 10. Now this is for a lot of reasons. This is a weird score because on one hand, the 122mm D25T cannon on this is a beast, and it's absolutely amazing, especially at this BR. On the other hand, the reload rate is absolutely terrible and forces you into a limited amount of rolls that you can successfully perform, at least with any consistency. On one hand, it can absolutely devastate and mostly one-shot anyone that it fights, be it in a down tier or an up tier. On the other hand, the reload means that you likely won't get a second shot if you screw up, which, along with a sub 800mm muzzle velocity, makes sniping somewhat difficult. Also, if you fire a shot, you best believe that if anyone else is near, they will likely go for you, which means that you likely won't have a way to defend yourself for around 20 seconds or even close to 30 seconds, depending on your crew skill. But in summation, if you're just considering the power of each individual shot, the KV-122 might be a 9.25 out of 10 in this category for armament, maybe even higher, whereas its reload is around a 2.5 out of 10. When taking everything else into consideration, including the lack of HMG or even just an MG on top in general, and awful cannon depression, the KV-122 scores very much just above average in this category. Also, on a side note, you pretty much need to have an expert crew, plus mostly trained loading plus leadership skills in order to make this vehicle usable at all in roles other than sniping. Again, just to reiterate, even though it has a 6.5 out of 10 score in armament, on a per shot basis, this might be the most powerful cannon at this BR. It's the reload that really sinks it. Now with that being said, for mobility, I give it a 3.5 out of 10. While not absolutely terrible, especially for a heavy tank, the KV-122 is the heaviest KV tank that is not a KV-2 of some kind. To make it worse, this only has 520 horsepower as opposed to the 600 horsepower engines on lighter KV variants. You can still get places with this vehicle, but you will not be able to cap a base before anyone else. Flanking with this is also essentially an impossibility. Now for survivability, I give it a 5.5 out of 10. The survivability on the KV becomes a bit rough at this BR, as the once great hull armor is now pretty decent, nothing more. It doesn't even feature the enhanced hull armor of the lower BR variants. Regardless, it's still fairly thick armor with 75mm of thickness on the front and rear of this tank and 60mm of thickness on the side. While not great, it can be angled to some effect, especially in a down tier. Where this vehicle shines more so is in its turret armor, with 100mm of armor all around the turret. While the cannon mantlet isn't so difficult to pen, the rest of the turret can be tough, which means that if you can expose only the turret, the KV-122 can absorb many shells before taking damage, especially at a range. But still, the KV-122 only has 4 crew members in a relatively small space on the interior, despite being a heavy tank, which limits survivability a bit, especially considering they are sitting right between a bunch of fuel and ammo. Now with that said, overall, I give this a 5.5 out of 10. This is a controversial score, I know. For me, the survivability is decent and the cannon is a tough sell. If you play this purely as a sniper, it could be easily a 7.75 out of 10 or higher. If you want to do anything near the front lines, it can be much lower than a 5 out of 10 overall, at least if you just play it like you would any other vehicle. Again, I'm not downplaying the absolutely devastating power of this cannon, but it suffers tremendously in its reload rate. Tanks such as the 76mm Sherman can reload in 6 seconds with a properly trained crew, which is lower than 1/3 of the best reload rate possible on the KV-122, all while still being able to pen pretty much any surface available on this heavy tank. At some point, the power becomes a non-issue. If this vehicle could somehow have, I don't know, about 180mm of armor pen at max, with maybe 200 grams of explosive filler equivalent, but only around a 15-second reload again at max, it would still one-shot just as many tanks just as easily as it currently does, and it would be able to play in so many more roles, so much more effectively than it does now. This cannon, while extremely powerful, makes the KV-122 unbalanced. The D25T cannon is unnecessarily powerful and has capabilities that aren't needed until around 6.0 BR or higher. But with that said, do I recommend the KV-122? I'll say this, I'm actually surprised by how much I've enjoyed playing this vehicle, and have had much more success with it than I ever anticipated. But I also have, quite sadly, years and years of experience in this game, and thus it's an easier vehicle for me to pick up, likely compared to someone with average amounts of experience, or more so, a new player in War Thunder. This vehicle is basically a point, click, and enemy go boom sort of tank, which is great until it isn't. The long reload of the KV-122 addles it and forces it into roles that are difficult to break out of, and worse yet, makes you extremely vulnerable for large portions of the match whilst reloading. If you don't mind these things, the KV-122 can be absolutely amazing. I'm actually surprised I'm saying that, but I've experienced it for myself. As stated before, as a sniper, the KV-122 is one of the best in War Thunder at and around its BR, though it suffers in almost every other way. So yes, I do recommend this tank for snipers, to purchase it whenever, though I will say to wait for a sale to purchase it for almost anyone else. This is an incredibly flawed tank in so many ways, but can be the biggest power hitter in every match that you use it in, so long as you play it properly and a few stars align. The KV-122 is a power hitter through and through, and will either strike out or secure a home run every time that you use it, leaving assists to be an anomaly with this vehicle. If you don't mind the feast or famine gameplay of the KV-122, then it will be a hell of a good time, and thus I give it my Tankenstein seal of approval. But with that being said, thank you all so much for watching. Let me know what you think about the KV-122 in the comments below, and also what you think about this review in the comments below. Also, please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel, as both are the best ways possible to support my channel. But either way, thanks again, and I'll see you all on the other side. Take care, everyone.